Hi everyone. Okay, doing the review for chapter 10 and 11 test. Our first exercise, you have the recording for, of course, for the practice test, the oral comprehension. It is going to be a map like this, and then a series of directions. I do want to let you guys know that the way that the directions are done here is that for number 1, for example, vous êtes en face, blank, and then they give A, B, or C, 3 different places. For the set of directions that you'll be listening to first, it will be just number 1. I'll say it through once, and then I'll say it through a second time, the same thing for number 1. Then I'll completely move on until number 2, say number 2 twice, number 3 twice, number 4 twice, number 5 twice. The good thing is that you will always start off in the same location on your map. So in the oral recording that I'll be doing for your actual test, as is and the same in the MP3 for the practice test, you'll see that I will sort of pause and make sure that everybody's found that beginning place the first time around for number 1, and then I'll continue on. So what you want to do is before you start the exercise, just kind of familiarize yourself with the map. Be ready just to use your finger and guide your finger along the roads and making sure that you think that you know where it's going to be. And then only after you've listened to it twice, then go ahead and read the actual question and the answers. Reading the questions and answers before we do the directions is not really helpful for this specific test. Next, for the dictée, that's always pretty straightforward. For this too, I will read it twice through. For your question personnelle, it is the same as usual, but I am asking you to include 2 pronouns minimum within the entire exercise, which is to say you don't need 2 pronouns being used for every single question for a total of 10. No. You need to use 2 anywhere within the 5. So some questions may lead themselves to easily use a pronoun. That's where you should use one. If it doesn't seem obvious where to use a pronoun, it's probably because you can't use one there. So the advice that I give is just to answer the question first and then go back and find out in your answer, is there anything that you have repeated word for word from the question itself? Cannot be underlined and turned into a pronoun. So as usual, what I recommend to my students going through this is to look and find if there's a question word first. If there's no question word, then you're usually answering a yes, no question or an either or question. If there is a question word like qui, que, où, comment, combien, then of course you're going to answer with information. Also pay close attention to your subject and the number of verbs that you have. Remember, if you have just one verb, you're going to want to look at the ending because this is either present tense or it's imparfait. If you have 2 verbs and your first one is avoir or être and your second one is the past participle, usually that looks like an accent aigu or an I or a U at the end, then that's passé composé. If you have 2 verbs and the second one is an infinitive, then that could be the futur proche. That could be the passé récent, if there's a little sneaky de here, venir de plus infinitive, or it can be something else. But whatever you're looking at, you want to transform that and reuse that same structure and that same tense in your answer. Of course, checking for vowels is always something that we want to be aware of after we've done it. Then that fourth thing is, of course, trying to see if there's any sort of a repeated expression in your answer that was from your actual question itself. So as an example, let's say that the question, or actually I guess we'll just do it in the actual things, and I'll show you an example. So for example, êtes-vous né aux États-Unis and où? The first question, do you have a question word before your inversion? No. So the first question is just a yes or no. Most of you are probably born here, so I'm going to start off with oui. How many verbs do you have? Être is the first verb. Né is the second verb. this is passé composé because I have a form of être and I have a past participle. So when I turn this around, your vous becomes je, your être becomes suis, your né becomes né with an accent. If you're a girl, add an extra E. If you're not, then don't. I'll put it in parentheses, but if you are indeed identifying as a female, then don't put the parentheses on. That would be incorrect. You just want to identify with whatever gender you identify with and put it in. Aux États-Unis, just copy pasting all my words here. And then it says ou, which is now my question word. So maybe and then pick whatever city you're born in. So for me, I'd say Milwaukee. Okay. And then I've looked for any vowels. I don't have any problems, at least not so far. Now I can look, well, in my answer, do I have any words that have been exactly copied down from my question that would be considered possibly a good pronoun? Aux États-Unis is up here in the question, and it's also in my answer. So I'm going to be able to turn this into a pronoun. Aux États-Unis is a converging preposition. États-Unis is a, little T there, is a place. So converging preposition plus place, this is going to become E. I want to put it in the right place, right here. So now I have j'y suis né. This comes out completely. À Milwaukee. J'y suis né, comma, à Milwaukee. I'm born there in Milwaukee. Okay? It's possible, of course, that your answer not lend itself well to a pronoun. Okay? I will let you attempt to do those on your own. Check the key, and then if you guys have any questions in class, you can go ahead and ask me at that point. Next is the vocabulary section. This is analogies, although on your test it may not be that way, but analogies work if you're not familiar with them. A is to B as A prime is to B prime. So there's a little typo here, I'm sorry. Des arbres is to a park as nager is to, okay, so we've got arbre, which is trees. Those things are in a park. Swimming, to swim, or maybe the noun could have been here, swimmers, is in a pool. So la piscine. Or maybe even better, because it said un parc, maybe this should be une piscine. Okay? So straight up vocabulary, lots of things, of course, from cities, and also post office, TV show, film type vocabulary. Reminder that at the end of every chapter that you have a list of all the vocab in the chapter, as well as the oral recording or the audio recording of those things. So wonderful place to go and study those before taking your test. First grammar exercise. Marie-France se souvient du moment où elle a rencontré l'amour de sa vie, Pascal. Dans cette description, mettez les verbes à l'imparfait. So imparfait, that's the past tense that we have, right? And as a reminder of how to do that, our imparfait, you will take the new conjugated form in the present that ends in an O and an ONS, right? And you're going to take off the ONS and then add endings instead, replace it. Endings are for je, AIS, tu, AIS, il, elle, on, AIT, nous, IONS, vous, IEZ, and il plural, AIENT. So let's say that we had the example of, let's see, réussir. My new form is réussissons. It's pretty long, it's an IR verb, but it's regular. I'm going to take off my ONS. So I'm left with réussisse as my root. So now I have réussissez, réussissez, réussissez. réussissions. Réussissiez, I know it seems long, and réussissez, okay? All of the verbs are regular, namely they follow this structure. The only irregular that you have is être, okay? Être is irregular because your new form is some and there's no ONS that I can take off here, so I can't use it at all. So my ending, or my root rather, for être is et plus your endings. So j'étais, tu étais, il était, nous étions, vous étiez, and ils étaient. Like I said, this is the only irregular that you have. In this exercise, you have verbs that are already there for you in parentheses, and you're not having to choose between imparfait or passé composé. So just straight up put that verb in, make sure that you are conjugating correctly. Like I said, the rule exists here for everything except for être, but you will need to watch out for verbs that are irregular in the present tense that have a different new form than just taking off the infinitive, right? So for example, this first one, prendre, your new form is prenons, take off ONS, add ending. So notice that here, your root is PREN for the imparfait. There is no D, okay? So just be very careful about how you are going about studying that. Do go back and study your present tense first. Next exercise is savoir and connaître, using these just in the present tense. Although, yes, using this in the present tense. Remember that savoir and connaître, they both mean to know, but savoir gets some sort of a verb after it. Either the verb is an infinitive, or, so as an infinitive, or it's within a new clause, usually has some sort of a relative pronoun. Often it's que, but not always. And a new subject, and the verb here is in parentheses, or is conjugated. Versus connaître, which gets a noun after it. So go ahead and review savoir and connaître for its for their conjugations in present. Choose which one to put where. And conjugate appropriately. There will be partial credit for this when I go through and manually grade after the fact. Passé composé versus imparfait. This is more challenging, of course, than the previous exercise where you were only doing imparfait, because here you have to actually figure out which tense you're using. So as a review, going back to imparfait stuff. Let me just kind of box off savoir and connaître here for you. Okay. Imparfait, continuing just with those notes here a little bit, is used for habitual actions or description or setting. Or sometimes it's sort of the background information that's happening, which is kind of what I mean when I say that this is the interrupted action. Namely, it was happening before, and then all of a sudden it got cut off by a passé composé verb. So passé composé, as a review, has not just one verb like imparfait per blank, but it has two, right? Your first one is avoir or connaître, avoir or être, and your second one is the past participle. As a review, avoir, we have j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. Être, on the other hand, is je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. Your past participle for an ER verb, for example, would be an E accent aigu in the end. IR verbs take off IR, add I. RE verbs take off RE and add U. Of course, you have a ton of irregulars. Agreement, of course, is something that we need to watch out for. At the end of your passé composé, of your past participle, you may need agreement here. Agreement occurs at the end here when you have être verb. It will make agreement with your gender and number of your subject. If you have an avoir verb, your agreement will happen right here with your direct object pronoun. Okay, so watch out for agreement and what it is agreeing with, okay? Then the difference between when to use passé composé versus imparfait. Passé composé has a definite start and end time for their actions. It's definitely very action or series of actions as opposed to habitual actions that are repeated. If it's habitual action, you'll see a word like tous les week-ends, tous les vendredis, toutes les semaines, toutes les années, okay? So something like that. As opposed to, for this, you'll see something like une fois, one time, okay? Or a word like soudain, suddenly. Go back to the clues that were written in the text, our textbook, for other words that will help you decide between passé composé and imparfait. Then, once you've decided what tense you are doing, fill in that verb. Remember that there will only be one blank. So if you have imparfait, you just have one verb. But if you have passé composé, you have two verbs in that blank. Once again, there will be partial credit here that if you choose the right conjugation of a verb, but you've chosen it to be in the wrong tense, I will give you partial credit, and vice versa. Actually, maybe I will... No, I'll do that with you guys in class. Finally, the last one is going to be using direct and indirect objects, object pronouns. So first on this one, you want to just answer the question first. You may want to have a piece of paper next to you to kind of use as scrap paper. So answer the question first. Okay. Then you want to see that underlined thing and choose the right pronoun. Third is then you want to put it in the right place. Fourth, you want to check for possible necessary agreement. Remember that agreement only happens on passé composé. When it's with être, it will be with your subject. And when it's with avoir, it will be with a direct object pronoun. Okay? And fifth, you want to check for any vowel problems. Okay? So as a reminder, your triangle of pronouns, we have me, te, nous, vous, le, la, les, lui, leur, and I, en. Me and nous, is standing in for pronouns for people, first person, singular or plural. Pronouns te and vous are second person, singular and plural, respectively. Which is to say that they're standing in for me, you, us, or y'all. These can be direct or direct. So the underlined thing is either going to be moi itself, or it will be à moi. Or it's going to be toi, or à toi will become te. Nous, or à nous. Or vous, or à vous. All of these will be included in that first column because it can be direct or indirect. Le l'aller can only ever be direct. So the first thing that they're going to be underlined is either going to be le, la, or les. Or it could be ce, cet, c'est. Could have the other form of set as well. Or it can be a possessive adjective like mon, ma, mes, ton, ta, tes, son, sa, ses, notre, nos, votre, vos, leur, with an S. So if any of these words are the first thing that's being underlined in the question, there's no preposition before it, that's what makes it direct, and that's why you're getting the le, la, les, okay? So if this is the first word being underlined. Lui and leur are for people only. Lui is a plus a single third person, him or her. Leur is standing in for a plus them. And it should be people, right? Third person. Ich is some sort of a converging preposition. Oftentimes that is a, but it could be en, dans, chez, à côté de, or any other converging preposition, plus a place, thing, or concept. Notice that E is not for people. En, instead of using a converging preposition, it uses some form of de, which can look like du or de, or de la, or de l'apostrophe, or it can look like the apostrophe. Or it's some sort of a quantity of something that can be an actual number, like un, deux, trois. Or it can be an expression of quantity like, beaucoup de, assez de, peu de, un peu de, un kilo de, une bouteille de, but you get the idea that all of those expressions of quantity have some form of de in it. The only one that doesn't have a clear de is actual numbers. But in any case, the form of de, including these guys, will all get replaced and become en, because you are adding a place, thing, or concept, not people. People is a whole different issue. You won't be using de plus people at all on this test. That will be on another test and on the exam. So when you're doing these, then that whole thing gets replaced with en. Do be aware that when you're doing an actual quantity, like un, deux, or trois, or you have a quantity word, that this will stay in your sentence. It will not get replaced. Then the second thing is, of course, where do you put your pronoun depending on the number of verbs and the tense that you're in. So let's assume that you have figured out your pronoun right here. You need to figure out now the placement. So here we go. We have all right. If you have just one verb and you're using present or imparfait, this is what that looks like. If you're using passé composé, you have a subject and you have two verbs. The first one is avoir or être. The second one is the passé composé, or the past participle. Then you may have something else like the futur proche or the passé récent, or some sort of present tense with an infinitive. Okay, so that will look like having two verbs once again. In the case of the futur proche, your first verb is aller plus an infinitive. In the passé récent, it's venir plus de, or d apostrophe. In the case of any other present plus infinitive, you have whatever infinitive or conjugated verb here. It may be like a form of aimer or any other preference verb. It could be devoir, vouloir, pouvoir, savoir. Could be an infinite number of things here, okay? And they may have possibly an a or a de or a par or something, some little preposition, but it kind of depends on what you're working with. So when you are doing that, then you have your triangle of pronouns. Okay. If you have just one verb, your pronouns are going to go here. And if you have multiple pronouns, they're going to go in the order of left to right from the triangle. So if you have le and en, although that's not a likely, let's say you have lui and en, your lui goes before en. Let's say that you had ich and me, your me would go before i because left to right in the triangle. Your passé composé, your pronouns would also go here, same placement, before the first verb. In the case of the third one, where the second verb is in the infinitive, your pronouns will go right here before the infinitive, but after any sort of preposition that you might have. Remember that in passé composé, that's where you may have agreement. In the case of pronouns, this would be with your direct object pronouns, which is your le, la, les. For sure, you'd have agreement. And possibly me, te, nous, vous, because those can be sometimes direct objects. Okay. If you have a negation, your ne will always go after your subject, and your pa will always go after your first verb and before the pronoun, the preposition in the case of one. Okay, so let's try to do maybe one of these before you try to do the rest on your own. Let's do number one. As-tu fini tes devoirs? So first of all, I'm going to answer the question. I'm given the fact that it has to be oui, so I'm not going to overthink this. I'm going to just start there. Let me answer the question first. My tu will become je. A will become et. Fini will become fini because I had two verbs. I'm going to have two verbs in my answer. I recognize that this is passé composé, so I'm going to use passé composé. Tes devoirs would really become mes devoirs in my answer. Now I'm going to decide what is going to be my pronoun. Mes devoirs is my object. It's direct because I do not have a preposition here that's underlined before my object. So I must be using either potentially me, te, nous, vous, or le, la, les. Here, you have to remember that me, te, nous, vous are standing in for actual people. So even though the homework is my homework, it's not me as a person. So therefore, I'm choosing between le, la, and les. Les devoirs, or mes devoirs is plural. So this will become les. I'll think about where I'm going to put this, referring back to my information over here. I'm doing passé composé, so I know that my pronouns need to go before my first verb. Uh-oh, come on. So I will bring that in here. I'll put les in. I'm going to look for any vowel problems. I don't have any issues, but I do have agreement issues. My les is a direct object pronoun, and I have passé composé, so I need to make agreement here. Devoir is masculine, so no E, but I have an S on the end because it's plural. Je les ai finis, period. This is where my end of my sentence will go now, because mes devoirs was taken out and became les. Je les ai finis. Had my answer asked me to say non, then my ne would go right after my subject, and my pas would go right after my first verb. Je ne les ai pas finis. I didn't finish them. I will leave the rest of those up to you to try and attempt on your own for your own practice. Check the key for the answers, and then when you come in, if you need extra help, I will certainly help you answer those questions or give you extra examples. That is it for the review. Best of luck studying, and I'll see you soon.